They told me to buy 2 seats for a dog. I laughed and paid for it. Then watched a woman try to put her child in the dog's lap like the rules were a suggestion, and that's when everything blew up. I'm Eli, Ranger's handler, and if you saw us on that plane you'd have thought it was the kind of small, stupid fight nobody remembers until it becomes a headline, except this one changed something in me. And maybe it should change something in you too. We'd flown together a dozen times. Ranger's a big white shepherd with a steady, soft face and a vest that says service dog, do not pet, which people mostly ignore until they see him work. He's not a pet to me. He's the reason my hands stop shaking when the cabin tilts and my brain wants to run. The reason I can sit in public without unspooling. This time we'd splurge for the extra seat because long flights are unpredictable and airlines are confusing, and paying for Ranger's own space felt like buying a little breathing room for both of us. Boarding was normal until an older woman with a precise haircut and a purse that looked like it ate purses stopped in the aisle and announced, loud enough for 3 rows, that her child needed the seat. "Ma'am," I said, polite because I've learned the hard way that anger on airplanes is like gasoline. "That's my dog's paid seat." She smiled like she was handing me a charity, condescending, rehearsed, and said, "You can't expect a child to sit on the floor, dear. Move him." Her voice smelled like entitlement and hand cream, and she didn't hide the satisfaction in making someone else uncomfortable. The flight attendant, a woman named Jenna who tried to look like an angel and moved like a referee, walked over, read the vest, read my boarding pass, did the thing most crew do. She put policy into plain words and offered solutions. "We can reseat you," she offered to the woman. "We can check the documentation." The woman cut her off with a scoff, like that was a slow-witted script from another life. Then she turned to me and said, quietly sharp, "You're making this a federal issue over a dog." That's the moment it got personal, because the accusation implied something deeper, that I was playing a trick, that Ranger was a prop, that my disability was a costume. I didn't shout. I don't do drama unless there's no alternative. I showed my card. I showed the airline receipt for the seat. I told them in the calmest voice I could manage that Ranger needed to be seated and buckled in the way the airline allowed. She laughed then, a sound that wanted witnesses. "Tickets don't make a service dog," she said. "My boy needs to sit." And then she reached not the polite ask, but a sudden, grasping motion toward Ranger's vest, fingers brushing the patches like she could prove he was fake by touching him. People around us leaned in, the cabin turning into a theater. Ranger's head came up slow and patient because that's what he does. He checks the world. He senses my heartbeat. He knows when to act. I put my hand on his flank, not to control him, but to say it's okay, stay. When air pockets hit 5 minutes later, the plane bucked like a horse and the cabin went thin with that hollow clack. Ranger went from passive to work in a heartbeat. He slid his head into my lap, pressed broad, even shoulder against my chest, and the tightness that had been climbing out of my ribs softened. The passenger 2 rows back, who'd been filming the boarding fuss like it was a reality show, stopped, lowered the phone, and watched. And I heard someone whisper, "Oh." That was the quiet evidence. Ranger was not comfort theater. He was a trained instrument, and the audience was about to change its mind. The woman kept pushing. She called the flight attendant back and said, loudly, "He's in the way. That dog's in the aisle." When a cabin becomes a courtroom, everyone takes a side. There were people who rolled their eyes at me, and there were people who leaned forward like friends arriving late to an argument they already felt they could judge. Jenna came back with the captain on the line and a printed page of federal regulations that are supposed to make these things simple, clear-cut. They aren't, not really. Laws are words, and words need people to enforce them, and in that gap humans insert motive. "Look," I said, because I kept thinking if I told the truth plainly it would matter more than any volume. "He's doing his job. He's licensed, he's trained. He's booked, we paid for that seat." The woman's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be allowed to bring that thing on here," she said, and when she used the word allowed she meant permission, power, the ability to make rules for other people. It flipped. She stood up like she owned the plane and then blocked the aisle under the clinical white light of the cabin. "My son is crying," she said. There was a small boy behind her, a folded blanket in his lap, an invisible battery of reasons for her claim. I want to be clear, I don't hate kids, but that should never be a weapon to take someone else's medical aid, and that's the heart of the conflict, power disguised as need. She demanded a different seat for herself, The crew offered multiple solutions vouchers, receipts, a promise, but the issue wasn't logistics, it was domination. Words failed where touch succeeded. In a second, she reached for Ranger's vest with a force that made my skin crawl, and everyone in the row heard the fabric rasp. It was a simple, violent grab, the kind that tries to assert control by violating boundaries, and Ranger flinched. He's a good dog. He doesn't bite unless it's absolute. But the moment someone shoved at his work equipment, he bristled, low and clear, a sound that made people swivel with sudden attention. "Hands off the animal," Jenna said, the official tone cracking into something human. The woman laughed a high, sharp bark of a laugh and said, "You think you're special? You think you deserve a seat more than my child?" Then she yanked again, harder, and this time Ranger stepped forward, not to attack, but to protect the space he's trained to defend. The captain's voice came over the intercom, clipped and immediate. "We have a disturbance. Return to gate." Deplaning in front of 200 strangers is a private humiliation dressed up as public order. The woman was escorted off with a police officer who smelled of duty and tiredness. Ranger and I were checked by another attendant who made sure we were fine, and the cabin exhaled in a hush that felt like relief, and something else, a nervous, judgmental hum. Phones were out. Of course, someone had already posted a clip, and in 10 minutes we were 2 different stories on the internet. And that's how chaos migrates from the moment into the myth. When you watch your life become a trending clip, you think about the small things, the exact time of the gripe, the shade of someone's shirt, the sound in your dog's chest when he breathes out. I filed a statement with the officer, calm and precise, because facts are a way to slice the noise, and I sent screenshots to the airline. People messaged me, strangers offering support, others asking if I provoked it, and the comments were a whole country divided into tiny courts. Somewhere in that noise an important thing happened. Airport logs and the captain's report matched my story, and an administrative hearing months later called the incident for what it was: interference with a service animal, a fine, and a temporary ban for the woman. You'd think that would be the end. It wasn't. People wanted to label us hero and villain, victim and villain, but real life isn't a headline. Ranger needed to sleep off the adrenaline. I needed to sit with what had swollen inside me, the awareness that the rules protecting people with invisible disabilities are only as strong as the folks willing to enforce them, and that power has a way of dressing itself in righteousness to get what it wants. So we did the practical things. Ranger went to the vet to get checked. I replied to emails. I recorded a short video explaining the facts, no anger, just documentation, and I learned that being measured doesn't mean being meek. The airline issued a statement about supporting passengers with documented service animals, and a local news crew called, wanting a face to paste onto a script. I gave one interview where I said something simple: "You don't get to decide someone else's disability." And then I said nothing more dramatic, because sometimes the quiet truth lands harder than a scream. Here's what stayed with me: the look in some passengers' eyes when Ranger worked through turbulence. The woman who later tapped me on the shoulder and said she'd been a skeptic until she saw him calm me down. The odd, satisfying ripple when a bystander stood up to say, "That's a service animal, don't touch him." Small acts matter. Policy matters. Empathy matters. But none of that fixes the larger wound: the way communities assign authority, how people weaponize sympathy, how a simple request for breathing room can expose a system's brittle seams. I don't want you to walk away thinking there's only one moral here. There are lots. The airline should enforce policy, passengers should respect work animals, and we all need to remember that invisible illnesses exist and deserve the same courtesy as visible ones. But I also want controversy, because controversy makes you think, and thinking breeds comments, and comments are the new town square. So tell me who was right. Was the woman justified by parental need, or was she using that need as a lever? Did I handle it with dignity, or did I fan the flames by refusing to yield? Is the law enough, or do we need better training for crews to diffuse exactly these moments? If you've ever been interrupted by someone taking your space, or you've seen a neighbor weaponize sympathy to win an argument, drop a comment, say where you stand, tell a story, disagree, and if you're feeling generous, share this with a friend. Justice isn't served by silence. It's shaped by conversation, by calling things by their names, and by choosing whether to protect the person next to you when nobody else will.